You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Now, one of the things we're going to do today relates to what is going to happen this coming week, or supposedly this coming week, because Congress supposedly, unless they delay it, is going to engage finally on the infrastructure bills, plural. So we're going to take a dive inside infrastructure, its history, its etymology, where it's going. Also, it's Spanish Heritage Month, although that's not the reason that our special guest this week is the great writer Sandra Cisneros. This interview has been in the works for a long time, and I couldn't be more pleased to welcome her to the program. So, we've got a lot to do. Let's get started and go inside those infrastructure headlines. Infrastructure used to be called simply public works. Actually, the Latin root of the word infrastructure means simply underneath or below the structure. Although this word never was really used by the Romans, it was coined in French from Latin parts in the late 1800s and initially was used, not surprisingly, to refer to the substructure or foundation of a building or road or a railroad bed, the installations that form the basis for any operation or system. It was also used in a military sense. Infrastructure originally consisted of roads and canals, the latter used for transportation or irrigation. Sea navigation was helped by ports and lighthouses. A few advanced cities had aqueducts with public fountains and baths, but far fewer had sewers. The first roads were often tracks that followed game trails, like the Natchez Trace or Greenwich Avenue in New York City. The first paved streets seem to have been built in Ur as early as 4000 BCE. Roads were built in Glastonbury, England in 3300 BCE, and brick-paved roads were constructed in the Indus Valley Civilization on the Indian subcontinent around the same time. In 500 BCE, Darius the Great started an extensive road system in Persia, now Iran. With the rise of the Roman Empire, the Romans built roads using deep road beds of crushed stones as an underlying layer to ensure that they kept dry. And on more heavily traveled routes, there were additional layers including six-sided stones or pavers that reduced the dust and the drag from the wheels. Many roads were built throughout the Arab Empire in the medieval Islamic world, the most sophisticated of which were in Baghdad and were paved with tar as early as the 8th century. As for canals, the oldest known ones were built in Mesopotamia around 4000 BCE in what is now left of Iraq and Syria. The Indus Valley Civilization in India and Pakistan had a sophisticated canal irrigation system, and Egyptian canals date back to at least 2300 BCE. In ancient China, large canals for river transport were established as far back as the Warring States, that's 481 to 221 BCE. The longest was the Grand Canal of China, finished in 609 CE, and still the longest canal in the world today, at 1,150 miles. European canal building began later, in the Middle Ages, due to commercial expansion in the 12th century, and it increased in frequency as traffic levels increased. Toll roads were built by turnpike trusts in England between 1730 and 1770. And turnpikes were also later built in the United States, usually by private companies under a government franchise. Also in the U.S., navigable canals reached into isolated areas and brought them in touch with the world. By 1825, the Erie Canal, 363 miles long with 82 locks, opened up a connection from the populated Northeast to the Great Plains. Railways followed. In England, the Liverpool and Manchester Railway was thought to be the world's first intercity line. In 1826, in the U.S., the Granite Railway in Massachusetts was the first commercial railroad to evolve through continuous operations into a common carrier. The electrical telegraph was first demonstrated successfully in 1837 in London, and in the U.S. the telegraph was developed by Samuel Morse and Alfred Vail in 1876. Alexander Graham Bell achieved the first successful telephone transmission of clear speech, and at the Paris expedition of 1878, electric arc lighting was installed along l'Avenue de l'Opéra and Place de l'Opéra. These systems were in direct competition with the dominant gaslight utilities of the period. Incandescent light came in from the first electricity system built by the Edison Illuminating Company in Lower Manhattan. Meanwhile, water distribution and water treatment and sewers were built in London in the 19th century in response to cholera threats. In 1863, the London Underground was created, and in 1925, Italy became the first country to build a freeway-like road linking Milan to Como, with Germany's first long-distance Autobahn opening in 1935, and the Pennsylvania Turnpike here in the U.S. making its debut in 1940. The interstate highway system was authorized by the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, which brings us up into the Internet age, begun with research into packet switching that was started in the early 1960s and ballooning into the estimated total number of Internet users 10 years ago, as of 2011, at 30.2% of the world's population, or 2.095 billion people. Imagine it now. In other words, we are not just talking potholes here, important as they are. Now, the Senate has passed a massive bipartisan infrastructure bill, which includes $550 billion in new federal investments for America's infrastructure over 5 years, but the package is short of the $2.25 trillion proposal that President Biden had unveiled earlier. I'm not going to get into the weeds here because details are easily available online, but I do want to point out the desperate need in this country in all facets of infrastructure. Highways and roads in poor condition, as are 45,000 bridges, climate change mitigation, public transport in desperation to modernize, the bringing of transit service to new communities and poor communities, and the modernization of rail and bus fleets, including replacing thousands of vehicles with zero-emission models. Also upgrading Amtrak and modernizing the nation's broadband infrastructure. That would be closing the digital divide in the United States. Port infrastructure and airports need to be addressed, with repair and maintenance backlogs and reduced congestion. Electric school buses should be fanning out across the country. Power and water systems, the electric grid, need thousands of miles of new power lines and expanding renewable energy to make them more resilient and protected from drought, floods, and cyber attacks. Environmental remediation must clean up brownfield sites. On and on it goes. But the rubber meets the road over what got named the American Jobs Plan, part of Biden's vision. We'll go into this at the end of the program, but this, also sometimes called the Build Back Better bridge, is the human part of the plan. Money for children, for caregiving to the elderly and disabled Americans, for expanding access to long-term care services under Medicaid, eliminating the wait list there, improving wages for home health workers who make approximately $12 an hour, workforce development that would help dislocated workers assist underserved groups and put students on career paths before they graduate high school. In addition, education, paid leave, enhanced Medicare, child tax credits, and the modernization of Veterans Affairs hospitals, and the cleaning up of the Great Lakes, plus corporate tax hikes, and measures that would make it harder for U.S. companies to avoid paying taxes by claiming to be foreign companies, and more. So you see, the sides were drawn quickly and rather dramatically. The progressives lined up staunchly behind Build Back Better, the second bill, insisting, love it as they did, they would not vote for it unless it was passed as linked together with the first bill, the so-called hard infrastructure bill, to ensure that moderates and conservatives don't water the second bill down. The so-called moderates in Congress did marshal their forces on the other side, as did almost all the Republicans in the Senate who don't want to raise taxes on the ultra-rich. All this, you understand, despite the American public showing poll after poll that they are ready, eager, and waiting for such changes. The need is indeed great, particularly during the pandemic, which has so hurt the economy. A massive public works infrastructure program, the likes of which Franklin Delano Roosevelt pushed through during the Depression, would not be a huge exaggeration. So now we will wait and see. Time for our first break, but don't you go anywhere, because coming right up is Sandra Cisneros, quite a thrilling guest. And, of course, also fighting words at the end of the program. All that about to happen. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
My special guest for today's conversation is Sandra Cisneros, who, if she had to carry her awards around with her, would stagger under the weight of them. Here's just a few. She was awarded a 2015 National Medal of Arts. In 2019, PEN America awarded her the PEN Nabokov Award for Achievement in International Literature. She's received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts twice and was presented with the American Book Award by the Before Columbus Foundation for her book The House on Mango Street. She's further received the Quality Paperback Book Club New Voices Award, the Penn Center West Award for Best Fiction, and the Lannan Foundation Literary Award for Woman Hollering Creek and Other Stories. She was recognized and received an honorary doctorate from Purchase in 1993 and a MacArthur Fellowship in 1995. And her work has led her to the Premio Napoli Award in 2005, and that novel was also shortlisted for the Dublin International Impact Award and nominated for the Orange Prize in England. In 2003, she became part of a second group of recipients of the newly formed Texas Cultural Trust's Texas Medal of Arts. And in 2016, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill awarded her an honorary doctorate of letters. Here is Sandra Cisneros talking about her latest little gem of a book called Martita, I Remember You. Sandra, welcome to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's an honor to have you. And the new book is the new novel, because there have been other books in the interim. But the new novel is quite stunning and touching and lyrical. It's called Martita, I Remember You. And it is also called Martita Te Recuerdo because it's a dual language edition in a slight but powerful book about, among many other things, women's friendships. And I want to talk about that because it's about three women. Corinna, who leaves her Mexican family in Chicago and wants to be a writer and goes to Paris, where else, and forms these deep friendships with Martita and Paola while she's sleeping on other people's floors and having to line up to call her family at home and have enough coins for the phone booth and coming near starvation in her attempt to become an artist. But their friendship, these three women, lies at the heart of their survival.
Yes.
And I want to talk about that because I think that that's the core of feminism. People can call themselves a feminist, but if they have no women friends, much less close ones, I'm not so sure. Talk about women's friendships.
Yeah, well, this whole story was born after I made my first trip. I was not as young as the protagonist and her friends. I was older, but spiritually maybe younger than they were. I was 28, finished House on Mongo Street, thanks to my first NEA grant. And then started traveling because I thought that's what writers did, and I was terrified of traveling anywhere, especially, if you're a Mexican daughter from a traditional family, you never go anywhere alone. You take your brother or your auntie or your cousin.
Sure.
And so this was something I was doing because, I wanted to be a real writer.
Real writer.
You're always trying to get through the imposter syndrome when you're a working class person because you don't have the idea of going on the grand tour. You don't have money that an auntie gives you to travel. You don't have that, and you have your family who is just hectoring you and saying, "What? You can't go alone. This will happen to you, and this will happen." So they instill this fear,
right? And
I wanted to get past that fear. And I thought initially, if I travel in Europe, they're used to seeing women traveling alone there, and then I can go and travel in Latin America. That was my plan. I was very naive, and my money ran out when I got to Paris. So the story is based a little bit on my fears, my experiences, but I created a composite with women I met in former Yugoslavia and in Spain and in France and in Italy, and I put them together for my story's sake and for my reader's sake, not to get confused, into just three women based on real women I met everywhere. But everywhere I went, it was as if we were all citizens of the Republic of Women.
Yes,
It didn't matter if they were from Sarajevo or Valencia or Milano or Rome or Paris or Nice. There was a understanding and a trust in one another and a generosity, especially if they didn't have anything.
Yes.
When people don't have anything, they give you everything.
That's right.
Because they know what it is.
Well, and that mirrors my own life and work in the international women's movement. I have never found a place that didn't make me eat something, make me drink something, sit down, have, be warm, be dry, be hungry, whether you feel like it. It is such a loving embrace wherever one goes.
But don't you think it's the way we love one another as women that we know to take care of one another?
I do think that. I think that very much. I also recognize the drive to get away from family, however loving one's family is, or however one loves them. There's a quote of yours from I think it's from Mango Street, the house on Mango Street, that I had for years over my desk when I was married, no longer, happily no longer, and it simply read, I have it by heart, not a flat. This is in the longing for an apartment. Not a flat, not an apartment in back, not a man's house, not a daddy's, a house all my own, with my porch and my pillow, my pretty purple petunias, my books and my stories, my two shoes waiting beside the bed, nobody to shake a stick at, nobody's garbage to pick up after. And I had that as an how shall we say, an inspiratory.
A mantra.
A mantra above my desk, yeah. And finally,
that's so cool. I love it.
Finally, I got it. I got all those things. Damn it! I had to get divorced.
You know what I had as my mantra? I taped it on the refrigerator.
What?
It was Mary Cassatt, and it was I can live alone, and I love to work. Which, of course, I did live alone, but I couldn't do it. It was driving me crazy, and I didn't love to work at that time. That was in my 20s. But, when you say it enough times, then it manifests itself.
Yes. And
now I can live alone. I do live alone, and I do love to work.
And you do love to work. And some of that has come with age and maturity, and some of that has come with practice. The more you do, the more you do.
Yes. It's a practice. Writing is like being in a monastery or convent. It's a practice.
That's right. And it gives me such delight. It may be wicked delight, but then again, you understand wicked better than most. in that various. I mean, I was reading up for this interview, and I kept coming across all the critics saying, "You've written this great coming of age works." In particular, House on Mango Street. And I thought to myself, how absolutely brilliant and how deeply satisfying that it is a Chicana woman who has now written these deep coming-of-age messages, as opposed to Thomas Wolfe in Look Homeward, Angel, or God help us, Salinger with The Catcher in the Rye. Two white boys on their version of coming of age, which doesn't ever fully really happen. And how lovely that yours has replaced them.
Well, I wasn't trying to replace anybody. I was just trying to write my own story. And, fortunately, I was in a situation where I didn't see myself reflected in literature or in the voices of my classmates. So I was forced to reckon with searching for what I knew that no one else knew, which is, of course, the primary thing you should learn when you're a young writer. What do I know that even my brother or my sister, who grew up in the same home as what do I know that no one else knows?
Well, yes.
And, that's how you find your voice.
That's right, exactly. But it's not easy, particularly for the class, as it were, of women. And then it's compounded by class and race, because you somewhere it was written that one of your earliest influences was Retke. And James Wright and so forth, and that you had to get out from under those white boys.
And Richard Hugo, and writers I still admire, but that wasn't my voice. That was me trying to sound like them in their big man's clothes. And it really was a matter of going the completely other direction. It was a good thing that I got outraged. I didn't get outraged so much at these writers, male writers. I got outraged with my classmates and with my instructors and my environment. And when I realized I'm in a master's degree program, and I haven't seen my house or my community written about with love. And, at first it was shocking, and I felt like quitting school and just whimpering back to Chicago and taking a job teaching high school. But some other part of me, I don't know where it came from, after a couple of days of weeping, I started asking myself, well, why have I never seen my community written about authentically and with love? And I decided I would write that book, and that's how House was born.
Well, House
but I wrote it on the side. Like you, I was a poet. I was in the poetry workshop, so the fiction didn't count. It was just this little life raft that kept me afloat during graduate school. And then, fortunately, I didn't finish it there, because I went right into the barrio teaching at an alternative high school and incorporated all the stories of my students. And I thought, wow, I don't know anything compared to these kids.
Yeah.
And so I was humbled. And it really I developed my politics there, working in the community. I wanted to write a book that they could feel comfortable reading, and that would speak about their lives. And it would be an honest, not a glorification of the barrio, not a condemnation.
Yes.
A true picture.
And it is. I mean, I have this theory that for women, and this is probably also true in terms of race and class, but certainly for women, in order to find one's own voice, one has to open up to the voices of other women. And there
Yes.
are, thousands of women's voices in effect in Mango Street. I mean, and there are,
Yes.
there are in all of your work. So that's how the voice gets found, which is an irony because it gets found as one of many, if you know what I mean.
Well, going into the barrio and teaching for me was maybe more profound than my 2 years at the University of Iowa. To me, my 3 years working in the community shaped me because I started thinking, who am I writing for? And why, and what good is literature for these kids that are coming to school with bruises or who are fighting off gangs or lovers or parents? What can I do? And how is literature meaningful for this community? What am I doing writing poetry? Maybe I should learn how to dispense birth control, how to learn how to fill out a job application, how to learn how to speak proper English so you can get past the guards and get a job. All these survival skills is what I was concerned with. And it made me question my own destiny. What good is literature is what I asked myself when I was teaching.
Well, that's a very scary moment or series of moments when one tries to cut loose from the patriarchal emphases, the influences, the male influences, all of those other influences, and yet one doesn't know what replaces them. I mean, or even if one does suspect that what replaces them is this vast, incredibly powerful and lyrical and generous voice of women, it's very, very scary to make that leap. And so when we do it, we kind of do it shaking in our boots.
I'm always a fraidy cat about everything.
Oh,
the
me
things
too.
I was afraid about in my 20s, I'm okay now, but now there are other things that have loomed up that scare me. And I think that's just how it is.
That's right.
You graduate from one fear to the next, right? You overcome one and then there's another one ahead of you.
Exactly. Listen, if I don't get sweaty palms and a feeling of faint nausea when I'm really, really working well, I know that's not good enough. Because only when I do, and I think, oh God, nobody's going to like this. Nobody's going to recognize it. Nobody's going to care, and they're all going to.
Or is this any good? That's what I always ask myself.
Oh yeah,
is it any good?
Any good at all? This is trash. Oh my God. And then I finally, if I get, what I do is I kid myself and I tell myself, well, you don't have to publish it, Robin.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's exactly the thing I say. Imagine this is so dangerous.
Yes.
You can't publish it in your lifetime. That's what I do to trick myself.
Exactly. And I
to
back
get past
into
the
it.
Self-censor.
I sidle into it sideways. So that, and then of course, once it's done, I find, not so bad. Maybe I'll publish it. Maybe, and then eventually I come to like it and affirm it. But wow, it's still and I just turned 80, my dear.
Unless it's scary, then it isn't any good.
There you go.
If it's so easy for you to talk about, then you probably already have written about it and need to look for climbing some higher mountain.
That's right. That'll be even scarier.
Right.
Exactly. Now, talk for a little bit. I know that you're busy and we've got to go, but talk for a little bit about the triad that Chicanas in particular have to deal with. Our mothers, the Virgin of Guadalupe, La Malinque, and La Llorona. And how
I don't know. I don't really think about them in historical purposes. Well, the Virgen de Guadalupe is very much a part of my life, but I've redefined her as a long line of trajectory of pre-conquest goddesses. So she's very different to me than the way the Catholic Church sees her. I don't see her as the mother of God. To me, she's a way that spirituality could approach me. I really think that the divine, in whatever way we understand that, whether it's our higher self,
right,
or whether it's some Christ figure or Buddha or Mother Goddess, whatever, is going to come to us in a way that we can hear. And in my case, my family has deep roots at the very foot of where allegedly a goddess appeared in Mexico City, and that's my grandparents' neighborhood, Tepeyac. But I didn't really pay attention to her, except that was a place we hung out at, waiting for my grandmother to come out of church, and we played in front of that church and ran up and down the hill where she allegedly appeared. It really didn't make any sense to me until I went through my own spiritual crisis. I think we all go through a spiritual death and rebirth in our lives, and several deaths and several rebirths. And to me, I see the Virgen de Guadalupe in a very different way. To me, she is a personification of love, and for someone else, that personification of love will come in a different guise. But it's all the same thing. You know, I feel as if we have people who are atheists, who don't believe there's a God, but no one doubts the existence of love.
That's right.
And to me, that's all the Spirit is.
Well, it suffuses your work, my dear. I mean, it just...
Well, I really try to honor my ancestors, and I always ask the Virgen de Guadalupe, which is, to me, just the bottle that love gets poured into, but she has no gender and she has no shape. It's just puro amor. And I try to do work with pure love because, you know, in real life, I'm just the rough draft. You know, I'm like anybody else. I have bad days and good days.
Of course.
I have days I get angry with people and I'm small, me gets upset. But the writing is our highest self, don't you think?
Yes,
that through the writing, we rise to our best selves.
I do.
And that's when I want to get to the Buddha nature, to the Guadalupe nature.
Some days I look at work that I've done and I think, oh, I couldn't possibly have done that. That's too good. You know,
right? Or how is it that that's smarter than what I was at that age?
Exactly.
How did that come through?
Exactly.
And
so
I think
it's a miracle.
I think we have like this. I always think of it as like a channel, that we're like mediums, and we channel la luz, the light, love. We channel it when we get our anger and our negative emotions out of the way. But in order for those to get out of the way, you got to start with your negative emotions.
Yes,
you got to start with your small I and move past and compost and transform them until you are a channel for la luz, for love.
It's the narrow gate. It's going through the narrow gate to reach the universal, you know.
That's right.
Well, this is a stunning book, and such a moving
I'm so glad you like it as
Precious.
a poet, because I wrote it as poetry. I tried to fuse, you know, the succinctness from House on Monza Street,
I thought
and the density from Caramelo, and to write something that was short and small and poetic.
It is short and small and deeply poetic. And I've thought, as I've read it, I thought the poet in her wrote this. So it's called Martita, I Remember You, and it is also called Martita,
Te Recuerdo.
Te Recuerdo. And it is in the same slim volume, and it's beautiful, and it's in bookstores now, or about to be.
And you can hear it on audio with me reading both the Spanish and the English. So take a listen, because I worked with 2 actors to do the 2 other characters, and it's so beautiful out loud.
I will get it and indulge myself in it. Thank you so much for being you, for writing the way that you do, for being the human being and the woman that you are, and for producing this exquisite jewel of a book.
A deep bow from one poet to another. Thank you so much, Robin. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Come back and see us soon, Sandra.
I will. Take care.
Time for our last break, but I'll be back directly with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Values. That's another fighting word. Values of late has been a much abused word. being brandished as an almost synonym for patriotism, jingoism, religious systems, and flat-out bigotry. Yet the word itself, stripped of these overlays, still has, well, value. For instance, disagreements over money are really almost always about differing values, whether they're quarrels about family issues, business matters, or politics. So it is with what's shaping up in Congress over budgetary emphasis. It comes down to values. I am the last person to take issue with funding for sturdy bridges, smooth roads, clean water, and all those other items that make for, shall we say, civilized living. But it's also true that such priorities, so-called hard infrastructure, are meaningless if there's nobody to cross those bridges, walk on those roads, drink that water, etc. Furthermore, any time something gets named hard and something else gets named soft, I tend to suspect that somehow sexism, perhaps unconscious, is at work. Values are what anchor our beliefs to reality. So seemingly amorphous matters like, say, education or caregiving or human rights itself can get lost or swept aside when compared with the steel buttress of a bridge or fresh tar to pave a road. Yet if we look with a feminist eye at such situations, we see that these are not only issues of so-called human infrastructure, they are women's priorities. Mind you, I'm not saying anything quite as simplistic as, there they go again, the boys and their toys, money for high-speed internet and the power grid, but not for paid leave or childcare. We need money for both. And the progressives, irritatingly purist about compromise though they can sometimes be, know this very well, even if they seem to be playing hardball, there it is again, in negotiations. The moderates certainly understand this. One problem is that women's priorities can appear not only amorphous, health care, clean energy, Medicare negotiated prescription drug prices to private insurers, but also eventual, off there waving in the future, taxing carbon-intensive imports, blazing a path to citizenship for millions of undocumented immigrants, that is, pie in the sky. Of course, another way to look at it would be to call it planning, which, let's face it, most women and remarkably few men do extraordinarily well. And, of course, the survival of the planet itself seems an amorphous and eventual issue. All this despite heated-up oceans, the spread of wildfires, the growing frequency of hurricanes, typhoons, floods, and other evidence that only the most ostrich-like climate change deniers would refuse to see. To be sure, we know that all issues are women's issues, half of humanity and so forth. So it is not just about the sequencing, what comes first and what second, or do they come in together, of the hard and soft two bills. $15 billion for removing lead-corroding pipes that poison our children's brains, which is nested in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That is a woman's issue. As is a $350 million pilot program for projects to reduce collisions between vehicles and wildlife. And clean energy planning, even if for much less than requested, is, and damned well should be, also included in the infrastructure bill, as should be affordable housing. So, of course, there's some, though not nearly enough, overlap. But the crunch reveals itself, as usual, in the etymology. Remember that the Latin roots of the word infrastructure mean underneath or below the structure, literally, which is where we find women. In a very real sense, women don't even exist in capitalism. We live under feudalism, all over the world, as well as here in the United States. Think of it, all that work we do, unwaged, outside the workforce, invisibly, in the home, in childcare, in care for older family members or sick ones, as well as in housekeeping, cleaning, cooking, laundry, shopping, gardening, subsistence farming, driving kids back and forth to school and to sports, and various other lessons, not to even speak of the unpaid literal labor in birthing itself, and so on ad infinitum. We form the basis for any operation or system. Never mind workers as the means of production in Marxian terms. We produce the means of production, the workforce itself. We are the proletariat. So to speak, we are the workers of the world. We are the infra. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag Fighting Words. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at The Robin Morgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor Regina K. Scully, WMC president and co-executive producer of this program Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.